Alright guys, I'm going to share a game I played this morning in the Vienna, and it turned out to be just one of those games where you really do get your opponent by the neck and there's an absolute kind of bloodbath, and this is one of the reasons why I love playing the Vienna opening as white. So without further ado, let's just dive in and enjoy the game. So I've got the white pieces, my opponent's rated just under 1300, and we have e4, e5. So I play knight to c3, which is the Vienna game, and then knight to f6. So this invites f4, the Vienna Gambit. My opponent here accepts the gambit. Now if you ever face what looks like a free pawn in the first few moves of a game, it's maybe not the best idea to grab it. So here, of course, you play e5, and this actually leaves the knight nowhere to go. Can't go there or there because of the queen. Can't go there because of my knight. So the only two real moves that are played here is knight going all the way back to g8, or queen to e7, then pinning this pawn against the king. And the reply to that is you simply play queen to e2, and the knight's problem reappears, and the knight does end up having to go back to g8. Anyway, so knight back to g8, and already black is behind in development, but is a pawn up. Okay, so now knight to f3 protects this pawn and stops this guy from making any further forward progress. We have knight to c6 and d4. So now white's got nice control in the centre. Both knights developed, and my opponent here plays g5, trying to defend this extra pawn from my bishop. Now, there's really, if there are rules to dealing with gambits, trying to hang on to your spare pawn, your bonus extra pawn, is very often going to get you into trouble as well. So let's see how this works out. So you have bishop c4, targeting the f7 square, and you see that these pawns are already, the king side here, because of this move, is really weakened the king side. Okay, so now if I can prevent black from castling queen side, I might have some good attacking opportunities. So now bishop to b4 pins my knight against the king. I'm unconcerned. All right, this is quite common, and if bishop takes, you recapture with the b pawn. You've got a nice strong centre in the middle. So I've castled now. My rook is now on a semi-open file, which means there's no white pawns on that file. There's only black pawns, so there's only pawns of one colour, and I can, in theory, maybe capture some of these pawns at some point. So now knight to e7 is pairing it up with this knight, which is kind of okay. And I now develop my knight into the board. So now, because I've got this lovely advanced pawn on e5 now, it gives me this gorgeous outpost for my knight. And how does black prevent the knight coming into f6 with check? Right, we're in the first few moves of the game, and already black is going to be starting to sweat. Okay, so we have knight now to g6. Hard to say what that move's really doing, isn't it? So, I mean, I can simply play knight to f6 now, and the king's going to be forced to move. The only other option is queen takes, and that's very detrimental. So, king's only got two squares. Now we go to here, and now my other knight comes in and grabs this pawn. That because of my knight coming in here, the pawn is no longer defended by the queen, as you can see here. Knight comes in there, check. That breaks the queen's defense of the pawn on g5. So now knight takes g5. And I've regained my pawn, but more than that, look how close these knights are already to my opponent's king. Right? He's going to be in for a kicking at this rate. But it's not all over. So now we have b6. So I'm guessing that black's thinking maybe fianchetto that bishop. So I now come in. So I've got a couple of options here. Got a few options really. I mean, one idea is to capture this pawn with one of my knights, and that comes with check. So let's say I capture with this knight, the king's got to go there or there. unless the rook wants to trade itself off for a knight. But I decide that in the end, the fork on queen and rook is perfectly acceptable. So queen moves here. Now I don't grab the rook straight away because I've got a nice in-between move. c3 now is going to force this bishop to retreat onto the edge of the board, because all of these pawns, you see now that after the queen's moved here, that was the bishop's only safe square on this diagonal, right? But having thrown in that attack on the queen's only move is to go to e7. Now when I hit the bishop should retreat. Now at this point now, black decides to stir things up with a knight sack. And this is where it gets really, really interesting, because now we've got, the knight is now attacking my light square bishop, right? The light square bishop is the only defender of this knight. It's also now removed this pawn, which was the only defender of this knight. So I decide to capture the knight with my pawn, and now my bishop is safe. My bishop's still defending that knight, and my pawn is still defending that knight. This pawn, however, is defended only by this knight. So we are in a jumble. Now the bishop can get a better square and goes to c5 with check, and king simply sidesteps to h1. Now knight takes pawn, and here, I mean, I have knight takes here, but now this knight again is undefended, so I could have grabbed the knight, but I figured that knight to here is interesting, because I'm now looking at c7, which is a very common target, and the queen doesn't grab the knight, because clearly there's also rook takes f4, and the queen would be pinned against the king, and there's nothing that can interpose and get in the way of that attack. So black cannot capture the knight on f7. So black now moves the queen to e6. Now I grab the rook. Now black grabs my bishop, and now I can capture on f4 with check. Right, so there is a tempter here to capture on c7 with a fork on queen and rook. King has to move out of the way, and now I go in with the knight, attacking both queen and rook. So I'm not concerned about the back rank, although my king has no escape squares. My queen's currently guarding the back rank, so we're okay there for the time being. And now queen to c6. Now, can you see a nice potential finish for white? Now I don't capture the rook at this point, I don't think, because I actually see that there's a potential checkmate, which is going to force black to do something he doesn't want to do. And so it starts with queen g4 check, right? Now we're guarding all of these squares, so the king cannot, there's only one legal move now for the king, has to capture the knight on h8, and now knight to e8. And there's a couple of threats here, main one being queen g7, which would be checkmate, and this forces black's queen to come right across to h6, but the queen is now in line with my dark squared bishop, so I simply capture the knight here with a discovery against the queen, and it's looking very unpleasant now for black. We have d5 to attack the rook, and I thought, look at my opponent, he's so dumb. He missed the discovery on the queen, right? But can you see what he just played? d5 attacking my rook. I go, haha, I got your queen. He goes, haha, I got your queen. And I go, haha, I got your bishop. So we're okay. Now we can capture my knight, but I'm a full rook up at this point. So bishop to g7 with check, forces the king here. Now bishop comes back. So, I mean, my only real threat here has got to be like a back rank mate, right? may be supported by this bishop. So I figure simplify, simplify. That's a discovered check. King has to move, swap off the bishop. King to f1 is critical because it means that my king now has an escape and the rook cannot make my king, and black here resigns. So yeah, I just thought you'd enjoy that. Another really, really fun Vienna Gambit game. Absolute bloodbath really from very, very early on. So if that kind of game strikes your fancy, then do take the Vienna out for a spin. I'm not getting bored of it anytime soon. And it's a good opening. It's a good opening right to the top levels. So enjoy. Thought you'd like that. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. If you aren't a subscriber, please do consider subscribing to Chess Bootcamp. And I'll see you soon.